As a National Chamber of Commerce, you would have seen, just as we saw that those videos before, we've joined with our colleague chambers and we've run the Small Business Too Big to Ignore campaign coming up to the last federal election. The campaign actually brought attention to the fact that 2 million small businesses in Australia employ 7 million Australians. That's more than the banking industry, the mining industry, it's more than any other industry, and yet these small businesses tend to be overlooked, overregulated and overtaxed. And if Australia is an SME country, well, I can tell you South Australia is the quintessential SME state within that SME country. Let me give you an example. About 46,000 employers in this state employ 19 or less people. Now what's interesting is that that's 88% of all employers. 88% of all employers in this state employ less than 19 people. So these are small businesses and many of them are doing it very tough as our domestic economy has been contracting. Now we were encouraged, because we're raging optimists and we're looking for any encouragement at all, to see the opposition's going to commit to an increase in the payroll tax threshold to 800,000 over the next few years. In fact, that was in our 2010 charter, so I'm always happy for political parties to take any of our policies and run with them. In fact, that's why we put them out. The trouble is that the threshold for payroll tax is already $1 million and over in other states. So even if we get to that, we're 4 years behind where Queensland is, for example. And the reason I raise that is because, let's not kid ourselves, we are in intense competition with other states to get skilled workers, to get business investment, to attract major projects. And the more competitive they are in things like payroll tax, land tax and stamp duty, the more likely we are to lose that work. So if we take Queensland as an example, they've got a 1.1 million payroll tax threshold and a lower rate than us. So if you're one of the typical 46,000 small employers in South Australia and you were in Queensland with the same bunch of employees, you're already $25,000 in tax ahead. And that's a lot of money for a small business, $25,000. And that isn't counting the other taxes and compliance issues. What I'm saying is that we're not going to fix this overnight, but we do have a plan to fix it. And it needs to be sensible and incremental, but we do need to get it done. And there are other things like work cover levies. We've got the work cover senior management team. I'm delighted that they're here. We've got a big job to do, but we are currently twice the average levy of any other state. Now, when you put all of that together, being one of those 46,000 small employers isn't much fun, and we've got to make it better for them, because you know what? That's the economic powerhouse of our state. What I find interesting is that the big end of town, the big corporates in Australia now recognise that their new frontier is SMEs. This is a country of SMEs and they want to capture that. And so if SMEs are confident, and if they're growing, and if they're creating jobs, then the big end of town, the big end of corporate Australia is also doing well. The other thing that teases me as somebody who hates to see high unemployment, who hates to see high youth unemployment, is if our 46,000 small employers in the state felt confident enough just to employ one more person, one more trainee, one more apprentice, then almost overnight unemployment and youth unemployment would go. So that's something to have a vision for. So the power of understanding and motivating our small employer sector is incredibly important.
You will see people get back on the public transport system in droves.
Look, can I just say that's just not the case. Look, yes, there have been some work in terms of public transport around trains, but the vast majority of our passengers are actually on the bus network. The bus network is a complete and utter mess under your government. So, look, there's no point in talking about what happened 12, 15, 20 years ago. You've been the Premier for 2 years. Public transport is getting worse. It's less reliable. And people are turning away from it in droves.
Okay, I think we've dealt with that one for the moment. And it's good to see, temperatures run high, because these are really important issues. Can I go to you now, Nick? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Premier, payroll tax, a pretty hot issue in this room. 4 years ago, your predecessor committed to a payroll tax exemption for apprentices and trainees. Within 2 years, that was gone. How did a good idea suddenly become a bad idea? And Stephen Marshall, you were pretty critical of that decision. Are you going to reintroduce it?
Well, the first thing is, in payroll tax in global, we have the third lowest tax rate in the nation. So this nonsense that we have an uncompetitive payroll tax regime is just wrong. Look at the Commonwealth Grants Commission numbers. We sit third in the nation. Now, in relation to the particular issue you raise, what we did is we implemented that apprenticeship payroll tax rebate or reduction scheme, and it was rorted. People start reclassifying people into the trainee role. So we changed it and we turned it into a completion payment in relation to payroll tax relief. So that's why we did that. And what we've done recently in the most recent budget is separate out those small businesses that are doing it tough, about a quarter of all people that pay payroll tax, and we've halved their payroll tax. Halved it in last year, halve again this year, which is a more generous arrangement than is being proposed by Stephen.
Again, that's just not true. At the 2010 election, we both went to the election saying that we would give payroll tax exemptions for trainees and for apprentices. Less than 2 years in, your government cancelled that promise that they made at the election. They took out $125 million worth of relief to the business community and replaced it with a temporary 2-year relief, which was worth only 22. 125 out, 22 in. It was an absolute disaster. Now, by contrast, we've said we do not accept that we should be the highest business tax state in Australia. It's a massive handbrake on the productive component of our economy, the component that we need to be firing so that they go out and employ people, and that's why we've said that we will work to increase that threshold at which we pay our tax.
Specifically on the issue of apprentices and trainees, though, Stephen Marshall, will you reintroduce it?
No. No, we have put...
What are you talking about?
Well, because we're talking about our payroll tax. Position is quite clear. We've got other elements of our tax policy that we want to talk about in the lead up to the next election, 5 weeks' time. Don't forget that the Economic and Finance Committee did a tax review. The government have got that information. We've got that information. And we'll be announcing other positions related to taxation in the lead up to the election. But make no mistake, we do not accept that we should be the highest tax state in the country.
Okay, I think that's asked and answered. Sarah.
I'd like to ask you both about the public sector, which surprisingly neither of you touched on in your speeches today. Premier, since 2002, public sector growth, employment in the public sector has grown at about 30%, which is twice the employment growth in other sectors. In 2010, Kevin Foley said it was critical that the growth in the public sector was curtailed. Why has your government failed to curtail the growth in the public sector?
Almost all of the growth in the public sector has been in frontline services. So doctors, nurses, teachers, emergency services officers, those services which support people and are absolutely crucial to the results we're getting in health and education, in police. So it's a quality of life issue. If people want those services, they have to be paid for. And one thing that we utterly reject is the idea of slashing and burning into those services is going to do anything other than crater the South Australian economy, as well as stop the incredibly important economic benefit that a number of these very important public servants deliver. I mean, these same public servants that are demonised are the ones that work in the Department of Mining, Innovation, Transport, Resources and Energy. And the energy section of that, the Mining and Resources and Energy section of that department, is regarded as a world-class system of mining development approvals. So much so it's copied in other states. These are the public servants that actually make speedy decisions on processes that allow people to develop our state, and this is absolutely crucial for our economy. So even the backroom staff that people are so fond of criticising play a critical role in the economic development of our state. So we don't accept. We believe that the South Australian public sector is an asset whose value should be maximised. We've reformed it. We've made very substantial economies and savings. We don't think it's a burden, though, that should be minimised. And there is absolutely no doubt that Stephen will have to cut deeply into the public service if he is going to pay for his tax cuts and his other promises.
Premier, how is that consistent with current government policy, which is to have a net reduction in the number of public servants?
Well, I'm telling you that we support a strong... But you asked me about what has occurred over the previous few years, and I'm justifying our investments in the public sector. Our projections about the future size of the public sector are there a matter of public record.
Well, I mean, it's not consistent whatsoever. At the May budget, the Premier, as the Treasurer of South Australia, outlined 5,200 public servant reduction in that budget over the forward estimates. Interestingly, as a proportion of our total full-time equivalents, that's 6.3%. He then went running around the state saying Stephen Marshall was going to lead some Campbell-Newman-esque reduction in the size of the public service. So I went and had a look at what Campbell-Newman had done in Queensland. Yes, Campbell-Newman had reduced the size of the public service by 14,000. But guess what that is as a percentage of the public service in Queensland? 6.2. It's actually lower than the mark that you set in your own budget. We've got a stalled economy because our business community feel that they're already overburdened. And let me tell you, increasing that burden is not going to increase our productivity.
Premier?
Look, can I just say, I mean, every single policy option seems to be, we'll get back to you. So we're going to give it to Infrastructure SA, we're going to give it to some productivity commission or some audit commission. We'll get back to you after the election. I mean, we've had 12, your mob's been in opposition for 12 years, you've had 5 leaders. We're almost 6 weeks out from an election, and we haven't seen one definable policy that emerges. Just that we'll get back to you after the election.
What's your work?
What I'm saying, it's out there. I'll publish
it. It's after the election. What's your planning review? That's after the election. That's what you've done for the last 2 years.
Let me just tell you that what we have done is publish an economic statement, an advanced manufacturing statement. We put a sophisticated plan to the Commonwealth. Because doing business in this state, and everybody in this room knows it, is harder than other places. And doing government in this place is harder than other places. I like you, Stephen, but you blouse in here, you give people platitudes, and you expect them to buy that you are up to the challenge of actually running this state at the most important time of its economic history, and I don't think people are going to buy it.
But
Stephen Marshall, do you like the Premier as much as he likes you?
Well, maybe a little bit less after today, but yes, I do get along well with the Premier.
Okay, I think we need to move. Sarah, thank you.
Just back to payroll tax. Mr Marshall, if you're so confident that raising the threshold on payroll tax is going to be such an employment generator, why not go further and raise the threshold to at least $1 million?
Well, let's have a look at our state finances. I don't know whether anybody's taken a good look at the profit and loss and balance sheet of this state, but it's in a parlous state. Last year was the year that the Labor Party had promised us that they were going to return to surplus. Well, actually, it was the largest deficit in the state's history. This year, guess what? It's going to be a larger deficit again. So we can't come in, as was pointed out by the CEO earlier, we can't come in and just say we're going to eliminate our revenue base here in South Australia. So we've come up with a prudent set of forecasts regarding offering relief in terms of taxation and sending a clear message to everybody in the business community that we want to have a business-led recovery of our economy, not a government spending and increased taxation and increased debt level recovery in our economy.
Can I talk about this debt thing? I mean, we have Moody's telling us, the rating agency, saying that our debt levels are manageable and they're not materially different from the other state jurisdictions, and well less than historically and indeed internationally. We have the worst credit rating in the country, worse even than Tasmania.
Worse than Tasmania, Premier.
This is Moody's assessment, manageable and not materially different from any of the other states or territories, and in international terms and historical terms low. And the reason we've run up those debts, if you look at the $10 billion that's actually been, that we have in terms of debt over and above that of the previous Liberal government back in 2002, $31.5 billion of investments in infrastructure. That's what's been happening. We've been building. So the things you're seeing around you today, the changes that you're actually seeing in the state and you actually want to see have more of, they actually cost something. They've been invested in. And this is productive infrastructure for the future of our state.
The departmental overspend last year was in the order of $600 million, which gets borrowed from some foreign finance market and whacked onto the debt. It's not all going to productive infrastructure, is it? It's departments failing to hit budget.
Those are the numbers.
No, look, I'm sorry.
Those are the numbers, and we are over the forward estimates. We are not borrowing to pay wages. We are borrowing for productive investment.
In the first 12 years of this government, we have had a staggering $3.6 billion worth of unbudgeted expenditure. As of the 30th of June last year, this represented almost 70% of the state debt was made up of that $3.6 billion worth of budget overrun. That's the picture, a lack of fiscal discipline. The Premier would have you believe that it's all about this infrastructure build that he has had. That's been a very recent phenomenon, and yes, we're going to significantly increase our debt because of that. But to date, a staggering $3.6 billion worth of debt has been run up on unbudgeted expenditure. Okay?
And yet, Stephen Marshall, you say you're not going to be able to return the budget to surplus any sooner than Jay Weatherill. Why not?
Well, I think it is actually an enormous task to turn this state's budget around. I mean, this is the picture. When I went and met with Standard & Poor's and heard the very sobering news that our economy here in South Australia, our budget here in South Australia is rated below Tasmania. I mean, it's almost impossible to believe, but we are rated below Tasmania. It's because the narrative out of the state government for an extended period of time has been the same thing. Look, this year's tough and next year's tough, but don't worry. In 2 years, we return to surplus, and then another year goes past. Well, that was a difficult year, but don't worry, in 2 years, we return to surplus. We never return to surplus. This year was meant to be a surplus. Last year was meant to be a surplus. The year before was meant to be a surplus. They're never, ever delivered because there's no fiscal discipline with Labor whatsoever.